Today is June 30th, 2014. This is Brent Björkman, the director of the Kentucky Folklife program. We're continuing on our interview series having to do with our Ranger Lore project, the working lives of park rangers. We are here in Glendale, Kentucky, and we are talking to a special guest today. Could you tell me your name and your current position with the Park Service?
I am Jerry Bransford, and I'm a seasonal tour guide for Mammoth Cave National Park.
Well, Mr. Bransford, I know that you have a deep connection to the park in a number of ways, and I've been asking people about how they got connected to the park, and could we start off by maybe you sharing a little bit of that with me?
Well, my connection to the park goes back in the 1830s at Thomas Bransford of Nashville. I didn't know the entire story, but I knew three generations of Bransfords, even as a young kid, per my daddy, uncle, and aunts and kinfolk. But after being introduced to Joy Lines some years ago, I found out there was actually a generation and a half more Bransfords than I really knew about.
Wow. And so your connections to Joy, your connection to the park itself as a guide, that wasn't an early part of your life, or it was an early part of your life? You start guiding after you were in the public sector for a while?
I had 30 years with a major corporation in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, and I retired June 22nd, 2012. Excuse me.
That's right.
June of 2002, and I had talked to Joy Lyons all through the years, and we had communicated and exchanged documentation and stories and things she would share with me through my father. And after retiring, she asked me if I was interested in becoming a tour guide, and had a lot of reservations about it, that I'd already been into the big arena for 30 years, and I just didn't know if I wanted to go another place at 57 years old and having to learn everything. But after thinking about it and giving it thought, I felt that I owed myself and my ancestors my assignment at Mammoth Cave as tour guide. I wanted to bring the Bransfords back.
What year was that when you mulled this over and you started the orientation and started going into the cave as a guide?
Well, I actually started tour guiding in 2004, but I had several interviews, and I had already been invited to Mammoth Cave National Park for History Month, that I would do a presentation there in the auditorium per Joy Lines, and that really developed my interest, and so being fascinated with my family story, I realized that there was even more than I knew about it, and I was really motivated to tell everybody kind of what I know and some things that happened to my ancestors. Some things were happy, and then as time went on, I realized some things were quite sad and disastrous, but it's all the American story, and I wanted to make sure that I did the best job that I could to let the world know what happened down there, beginning in 1838 until 1941.
Huh. Did you grow up with? It sounds like you knew some, and then you did some of your own research, but also through your colleague Joy Lyons, learned some, because she was working on, I think she was also, an interest of hers, I think, was also an African American story. Is that true?
That's true. Joy Lyons would see these photos in the material, and they all said Stephen Bishop, and they couldn't have all been Stephen Bishop. Some of these, Stephen Bishop had been gone 120 years, so it's just several different things that came together coincidentally, and my dad told me a lot of the stories about Nick Bransford buying his way from slavery at Mammoth Cave. My dad told me about old ancestors losing children to slave buyers before the Civil War, and but he didn't seem to know much about Matt, the first Matt. He knew about Henry, my great-grandfather, and third generation guys, but he didn't seem to know about Matt. And Joy Lyons is the person that introduced me to Matt, first generation, who was actually fathered by Thomas Bransford of Nashville and leased to Franklin Goring for $100 a year, along with Nick Bransford. So there was actually more back there than I really knew about. It was quite a fascinating story. I was fascinated that I knew about Henry, my great-grandfather, but it was quite powerful and amusing about Matt, the first Matt. He imparted things on how they lost those children, and the interview of James Rushing Fowler, the Union soldier and abolitionist, you know. So all that really sparked interest for me, and particularly considering how my ancestors left. They left under duress. They didn't really want to go. I felt there was a lot of injustice in that, and I felt that as time went on, I owed it to the family and to the public to bring the Bransfords back, that I have such a great opportunity to do things that some of them never had opportunity to do.
And tell that story.
Tell that story, they were never grandfathered into the National Park uniform. None of the men of color were. And I understand that a lot of the Caucasian guys were given the choice, but none of my ancestors were. And I feel that I owe them that tribute to work there for a while.
How do you bring that story in? What tours do you guide? Do you guide the wide range of all the tours?
We got a wide range of tours. The historic tour is probably, and the discovery tour is probably the greatest opportunity for me to talk about the slave ancestors and the saltpeter vats and black men and their contribution to the cave. We all do all the tours, but the historic tours actually allows me to walk in the footsteps of ancestors that were there over 101 years before I ever came there. I see their names and dates along the route, probably at least 5 along the historic route, and then just the other day a young person came and told me that they found Clifton's name down Audubon Avenue, a signature and date I had never seen before.
So you're always learning as well.
Always learning, and I'm quite fascinated how deep into the cave some of my ancestors' names are found. Deep, dreadful places. There's actually a Bransford Avenue in the cave, named from Will Bransford, my second cousin. He was a part of the exploring team that found Cathedral Dome in 1906. He's also the Bransford that escorted natural gypsum formations and a little Indian Native American girl's remains named Little Alice to the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. Will. So, it's fascinating to know what he did, and that he actually was up in Chicago for several months. He was a representative from Mammoth Cave to the Columbia exhibit in Chicago.
What are some of the things that you try to impart to people? And not that I necessarily give me a part of your speech to the public, or maybe give me a little bit of that. I mean, I think it's just an interesting thing that you have this legacy that you're getting across, and the feedback must be pretty amazing for people when they have a tour from you to learn these things from your family.
I think the things I would really want to do is to let everybody know that Mammoth Cave is a wonderful cave system, internationally renowned. But not only Bransford, but I want to let people know that men and women of color, had a vital role in the success of that in earlier days. For many years, none of these stories were told. So I feel that I'm glad and have responsibility to let everybody know their roles and the things they experienced in the cave. I'm not trying to give them more than they deserve, but certainly I don't want to come away feeling that like the first 63 years that it became a national park, that they really weren't given what they did deserve.
Yeah. How was your introduction? You came into this later and thought about helping to fulfill this idea about telling the story of your family. How did you? What's the training like? We're talking about working culture and working with different people. Do you start out by guiding a tour? Some people have talked about you start out by trailing a tour and listening to someone else. Because you had talked to Joey Lyons about this importance of telling the African American story. Was your training, was it different or anything that you know of? Or
Well, my training wasn't different. I wanted to be careful when I came that I wasn't sure. Being 57 years old, taking a brand new job after being somewhere 30 years, it's just a whole lot of things came to mind. But after getting down there, I realized that folks treated me better than any place I've ever been. They treated me quite well. I had reservations about going because There are stories inside me that I remember being a very young kid going to Mammoth Cave as a young person in the 50s and 60s, and we couldn't go inside the restaurant, and those people weren't necessarily unkind in telling you that coloreds can't come into the restaurant, but all these things had to do with the mixed feelings I had wanting to become a tour guide. I knew that there would obviously be training in some things that's required. Every job I've ever had, there's certain things that's required, but I didn't know what my fit would be, and I found out that my fit's quite great. I'm glad to be a part of the team. I can't imagine people treating me kinder and nicer than what I've received at Mammoth Cave. But I didn't want the story and the legacy of the Bransfords to overpower what I was there for in the first place, and it seems to date that hasn't happened. Did that get close to your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm just trying to figure out, because it is such a unique situation, and I guess some stories about your family, I would like to hear some of those, because it is unique. I know you may have shared those with other people. We talked a little bit. You have been interviewed more than one time. But I think for the Library of Congress, it'd be really great to share maybe a chronology a little bit of the things that you share on your trip about the particular persons that are connected to the cave from the Bransford line.
Well, it all began with Thomas Bransford of Nashville. Thomas Bransford of Nashville, as a matter of fact, there's a Bransford Avenue in Nashville, Tennessee today, in the business district of Nashville. It's named from one Thomas Bransford, who was business partner and associate with Franklin Goring, who owned the cave in 1838. It seems that history says that Franklin Goring owned Stephen Bishop. He pays $5,000 for the cave with the idea of tourism. But a short time goes by and he realizes that Stephen Bishop is not able to accomplish all the things that's required of him. So he speaks to Thomas Bransford of Nashville, who is also a slave owner. Thomas Bransfords of England were quite well-to-do. Bransford Avenue, again in Nashville, is named from him. So he sends up Matt Bransford, my great-great-grandfather, and Matt was 16 years of age, and Nick Bransford, who was really, we found out in more recent years that he and Nick were not really brothers. They only shared their owner's last name. But we have proper documentation in Thomas Bransford's record book, who is owned by Pat Bransford Davis of Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area, actually Morgan Mill, Texas, that she has the record books, and it makes it very clear that Thomas Bransford knows that he's Matt Bransford's father. So he leases Matt to Franklin Goring and Nick for $100 a year as slave guides and explorers.
And that would have been in the years?
1838. And then in 1849, when old Thomas Bransford passes away, Matt's half-brother inherits him. And he continues to lease him to Franklin Goring. Well, of course, by now, let me make a correction. Franklin Goring only keeps the cave 1 year and sells it to Dr. Cron of Louisville. But Nick and Matt are continued to be leased by their owner, their half-brother, Thomas Bransford of Nashville, Thomas Bransford Jr. So I find it fascinating that that a person can be inherited by their half-brother or sister.
Yes, absolutely.
It's like you, of course, at that time, according to the way that we were doing things, he was just property, a slave. Mm-hmm. But I find it difficult to comprehend that your half-brother inherits you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And their guiding, do we know from the public record what their work was like, guiding and...
Well, public record says that they were quite the well-renowned celebrities. It seemed that Nick, Matt, and Stephen Bishop got along pretty well, because I think they were very important young boys, and they realized that they had a unique situation in life. I'm sure that there were probably other slaves, so to speak, in the neighborhood that realized that these fellas are entertaining an international crowd. I mean, they're not in the barn lots and the hay fields. They're working in the cave and directing and taking care of free people of royalty, educated people, depending on slaves to take them on all-day walks and take good care of them. So it seems that Franklin Goring and Dr. Cron have told their guests to follow the slave's direction to the letter. Although we also have material that suggests that some free people had difficulty maybe having a slave that kind of raised their voice at them. But the slaves were interested in keeping their job and the safety of their old boss's guest.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had a good job, you did whatever you could to hold on to it and maintain it, you know.
Right.
And that's what they did. Kings and queens, free people, depended on them. Grateful to have them.
And things changed maybe from the surface when you get down there with your guys.
Absolutely, absolutely. As a matter of fact, we have material that supports that. Perhaps Franklin Goring had heard about the slaves having lunch with people from England, even though they depended on the slaves to take care of them on long, dangerous hikes in the cave. They were reprimanded that you're not supposed to eat with free people. So I take that Matt, Nick, or Stephen would cordially decline the invitation to have lunch with free people, and they would go to the other side of the cave trail and have lunch with themselves. Mm-hmm. But it seems that the folks from England didn't have the issue, and I don't know that all American whites did, but it seems that we know the most about folks from foreign countries that were so grateful for their careship of them that they would often come to the grand table and eat with us. We want you over here. And maybe perhaps they did that, and they were told not to do that anymore.
Yeah, and I was wondering about I've heard things about the education of the Matt and Nick and Stephen, mm-hmm. and meeting these people, and they're speaking different languages at sometimes. They probably learned little bits of other languages, and do you know if that propelled them to do some studying on their own and about the world, and it made them much more worldly than any other African American counterparts?
I think it did make them more worldly. I think the information and the exposure that they received from free people really enlightened them about the outside world. It's even suggested that those slave guides might have known more about the outside world than free whites, because I take if you're in the cave with a dentist or a geologist or a scientist, you were probably fascinated that they asked you to direct them, but also you would bend an ear to absorb all the information that you could. So they did know a level of geology and science, and some said they could speak Greek and words of German and those kinds of things. And there's places in the cave that I'm satisfied that the handwrite and so forth is so neat. For example, a signature for Nick Bransford at the Snowball Room is such a neat signature that I'm satisfied that a educated free white wrote that tribute to Nick on the cave wall at Snowball Room. Don't think Nick could write that perfectly.
Mm-hmm. How about after after 1865 and the rest of your family legacy? Is it a continuous legacy with the Bransfords and in the cave and guiding for the most part?
It's continuous. So the Bransford was there. Of course, Matt was still there. Henry was still there. Matt's son. By now, Matt, first generation, had lost 3 children. He lost 2 girls and a boy to slave buyers. But fortunate enough that Henry was kept on. And so it seems that Matt didn't know much about the outside world, and he taught his son Henry the tricks to the trade and the guiding skills that he chose to stay on. Old folks in my family told me that Matt says, I don't know so much about the outside world, and I feel good here in Mammoth Cave, so old boss said he'll pay me now to stay on, and so I think I'll stay here. And this is a good enough job for me. That's what my daddy said, old folks told him. And we did stay, and that's how we became residents of Mammoth Cave, which eventually became a national park.
Mm-hmm. So your Bransfords were displaced when the park was created?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, Matt Bransford, 3rd generation, my great uncle had a motel and resort up Flint Ridge down Great Orange Road. I don't know where the foundation of it is today. And it's only 2 places in America that was registered for people of color to stay in the 20s by AAA. Travel Club, and Matt Bransford of Mammoth Cave was the number 2 listing. Places recommended. If you're traveling and you need a recommended place to stay, Matt Bransford's hotel is on the AAA list. And it was quite something to see too.
Wow.
Quite a hotel, quite a resort. I have 20 postcards in my basement down in my file that we found in the old house that are just invaluable to our family.
Of the hotel property?
Yes, absolutely. Uncirculated postcards.
Wow. I'd love to see that.
It's on the internet.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
He would get aboard a train, he and his wife Zimmy. He and Zimmy were quite respected in the neighborhood. Blacks and whites respected Zimmy and Matt. Now, why they had no children, that Lewis, John Henry, my grandfather, and Charles Wesley, my dad's grandfather's brother, they had large families, but for some reason Matt and Zimmy didn't seem to be able to have children. Mm-hmm. So they would have nieces and nephews over to their house and work around the garden and work in the hotel for them. But the hotel was quite something to see.
How long did that? So then that, when the park was taken over, is that when it
demolished, and there's quite a stressful letter that can be read in Mammoth Cave Library that Matt goes to. I'm going to assume that it was Judge Jennings. Judge Jennings was in charge of the Mammoth Cave estate, and this Matt is 3rd generation. And the letter worded in my own words is that he hears about the takeover coming place, coming into existence, and he's worried about losing his hotel. He's worried about losing his job. I don't know if he was as worried about losing his job as a tour guide as he was losing his property in the hotel. And he simply says, Judge, I was born here, my daddy was born here, and his daddy before him. Is there a chance that we could be spared? He says, I'm having sleepless nights thinking about this. But eventually all the men of color were called in at a specific time, my daddy said, and we were able to document it, I think, that none of the men of color were going to be kept on as tour guides. So they were alerted perhaps a year and a half in advance that this national park thing is coming, so you need to think about what you're going to be doing for employment, because probably be no man of color in the uniform. Some of my ancestors actually told me a little bit about that, that the Bransfords were actually required to train their successors, and they did it with dignity. But also my grandfather's brother, Matt, 3rd generation, never came back to Mammoth Cave for anything. He said he wanted to remember it like it was. I just imagine there was a certain amount of emotional hurt there.
What did your ancestors that were guiding, what did they do following their training of these people?
Clifton Bransford worked on the colored work team. Clifton Bransford's name can be found, Camp 510, and down River Room up the steps. He was part of the colored work team, Clifton. And sometimes I walk up there while I'm trailing a tour, and I walk up in that cove where Clifton left his name. And I know where it's 1924. This was Clifton. Clifton was still actively working as a guide, but working in a cave all your life, been a tour guide, 4th generation. In order for you to stay in the area, you become a pick and shovel guy. Now, I'm not saying anything wrong with being a pick and shovel guy, but I find myself, it almost brings tears to my eyes. I wonder, how would it be that you're working for old boss in a place that you were literally born up and raised? You're nobody but a pick and shovel guy working on tour routes that you've toured all your life. And then when those, and he and his brother Elsie was a real renowned tour guide. Elsie moved to Glasgow. We called him Uncle Elsie. He was actually my second cousin. So much older than me. We called him Elsie, Uncle Elsie. But Clifton moved to Indianapolis, Indiana. And Joy Lyons and a delegation from Mammoth Cave National Park found Clifton by my daddy, and they went to Indianapolis and interviewed him. I have a VHS movie, and that same movie is in the library at Mammoth Cave. And you know, those tour routes that I walk on today didn't mean as much until I'd seen the VHS movie per Joy Lyons and delegation of Mammoth Cave, but he would talk about Little Bat Avenue, and he would talk about the bottomless pit and the corkscrew. And after coming to work there some years later, all that real had a true meaning. that Clifton had been there way before I got there. He was a gracious fellow. We called him Doc. And he was the king of the guys around Checkerwise. Were respected. But I wonder how he felt when he had his last day. He moved in Indianapolis, Indiana, and became a janitor for Indiana Power and Light. But can you imagine the information and the skill and the knowledge he took with him? But I credit Joy Lyons that she had an interest and she found him. And they had a really nice interview. You can see that interview too.
Is that something that the Mammoth Cave and this work that you do they give you time to do your own research, or do they is that something they want you to do? Try to look up things on your own, increase your own knowledge of your story that you can share?
Well, absolutely. They encourage us to do our own research. I feel blessed that I think I know what happened in my family, even from England to Nashville. I feel sad that there were generations ahead of me who knew some of the story, and they didn't really know. My dad died in 2002, but he didn't know the whole story. And I have cousins and nieces and grandchildren that I'm sharing the information I have because I think I know what happened. They passed away not knowing what happened, but I think I know the story. I know what happened, that they came to Nashville. I think I know what from Nashville to Mammoth Cave, and I have a good idea of the whole thing. So I'm making sure that my children and grandchildren, that Mammoth Cave is kind enough for us to have a family reunion, and they'll allow me to take family members on guided tours. It's a private tour, and I make sure that I share with them the information that I've absorbed over the last 30 years.
You hold a Bransford reunion at the park?
We do. And
is it a yearly thing? Can you tell me about it?
Well, about every 2 years. We're not going to have it. We had it last year, and so Kathy Prophet, a day-to-day operations person, is kind enough to allow me to take my family in. And she's been very gracious about doing that. And Mammoth Cave National Park, period, and even Joy Lyons did. So I get to tell them some of the things that I've learned. I tell them some things they already know, but I share with them many of the things I'm sure that they don't know. I want to make sure that when I'm gone from Mammoth Cave National Park, that the story doesn't go away again. It went away for a while when Clifton and Elsie and Lewis turned their keys in 1939. They were the last three. So there was about 60 plus years, wasn't much said. But I feel that I have an opportunity to kind of bring them back, the Bransfords back, hopefully telling a true, documented, and tasteful way the whole story. The story of slavery, story of Matt losing children, the story of them having happy days escorting kings and queens to the cave, free people depending on them. Matt Bransford been able to go to Louisville, Kentucky during the Civil War and have his photo made. Free. He was in Louisville, Kentucky for several days during the Civil War. They were such a celebrity that they invited him up and took him around Louisville and showed a slave around that they were honored to have him to come up and be their guest.
You've been sharing these stories, prideful stories of your family with your family. Do you have anybody in your family that's you think might take over the sharing of these stories for future generations?
I sure hope so. My daughter's a healthcare professional. She has a lot of interest in the story, but she's a busy young wife with young children and college kids and grade school kids. And my son knows what happened, and I hope it doesn't end here again. Mm-hmm. At 67, I worry that, I'm grateful to be there. I can do the job quite well, I think. But at 67, I couldn't possibly think about being there 20 more years, could I? So I'm hoping that someone wants to come, and hoping someone will come.
Yeah. Well, it's such a vibrant story. And I think your trajectory, having this legacy, being born into this family, and working outside of the context of a cave for many years, but you came back to it.
I did. And been a little kid growing up in Glasgow, Mom and Dad. Daddy had this huge big black album. Had all these pictures in it. And I used to, as a little kid, I said, Dad, who is that? Dad said, this is Will Bransford. How am I kin to Will? He says, Will is father's sister's son. I said, well, what did Will do? Well, Will's a guide. Well, Daddy, what kind of guide? Well, he was a guide at the cave. He took things to the World Fair in Chicago. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you a story that he told us when we were little kids. I said, what's the story, Dad? He says, well, Will could pass for white. Will's daddy, there's a lot of white on both sides of the family. Will's father was a white man in Cave City. So Will was a very popular tour guide at Mammoth Cave. So the proprietor wanted Will to go down Specimen Avenue and take Jimson flowers and take this little mummified Native American girl's remains to Chicago. Now, we think, this is what my dad said, we think that Will was very well liked, but Will could pass the lines of color quite easily. Hazel-eyed, straight hair, very bright. You have to see a picture to know what I mean. So Will told my father and the other kids on the cabin porch that he'd gotten aboard the train in Louisville, Kentucky to go to Chicago. He says, I wondered what it would be like to ride up front in the all-white car. So he says, when the train got past Louisville, I decided to ride up front. He said the conductor who was taking tickets never knew I was a man of color, and I never told him. So I was up Chicago. He said, I didn't really want to go to Chicago because I hadn't been any further than Louisville and Nashville. But after getting to Chicago, I think he was really glad that he did. And he says, after we had been to Chicago for a few months, coming back, I rode in the all-white car just because I could. But when I got near Louisville, Kentucky, I realized that I was getting close to the boundaries, and I took my proper seat in the all-colored car. And Dad told me that story at least twice. And if you see a picture of Will, you can understand how Will, very gracious, smart guy, witty, quiet. You can find his name right before you go across the bottomless pit. 1893, it's a very nice one too. Mm-hmm. J.F. Stevenson, Willie Bransford.
It's just amazing to be able to point out the markings and the names of your ancestors.
Joy Lyons showed me that. Hadn't been for Joy Lyons, none of this would be where it is, I think. I just feel that what's come together was meant to be. And then, about 30 years ago again, Pat Davis, who was heir to Thomas Bransford of Nashville, comes to the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, Tennessee, knowing that she's heir to Bransford's of Mammoth Cave because she has the slave record business books of Thomas Bransford. So she says, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, let's go to Glasgow to see if we can find any Bransfords. She looks in the phone book and she sees David C. Bransford, my father. So she says, Mr. Bransford, I'm Pat Davis, heir to Thomas Bransford, who we are satisfied that once owned your relatives. And she said, I've got some history I think you'd be interested in if you would like to know. Well, Dad said, just coincidentally, I have a cousin, have a son in Glendale. His name is Jerry, and boy, has he been pumping me for the last few years about the Bransford history. Maybe you'd like to meet him. Well, we met by phone about 32 years ago. We've never met in person, but the information that she has in the record book is invaluable. It speaks of Nick and Matt, how much the owner received to have them at Mammoth Cave, that they were appointed to Mammoth Cave, and Matt brings his mother some rocks from Mammoth Cave, and a little slave girl said, my boy Matt brought me some rocks from Mammoth Cave, and nobody better ever bother my rocks. And I think Matt had just found some pretty things in Mammoth Cave that he brought his mother. So it seems like that story that Pat Davis has the record book, my interest in Joy Lyons, and then the Kellers in New Orleans, Louisiana, has this huge sketch of Matt Bransford that they inherited. Mrs. Keller's great-great-grandfather was the artist who sketched Matt's picture in 1857. So this picture laid in their possession for years, and they didn't know who Matt Bransford of Mammoth Cave was. So they come to Mammoth Cave with this huge sketch. And Joy Lyons makes me aware of it. It's a very nice sketch of Matt. So these three things, I truly feel, were not just coincidental. I don't feel my appointment there at Mammoth Cave is just by chance. I really believe that I was meant to be here for a while. And I'm doing my best to be the best tour guide I can for a number of reasons. I feel like I have a great responsibility responsibility of the National Park Service, that they took a chance on me becoming a tour guide, and also a responsibility to my family that I want to make sure I tell people what happened and give them the best information I can.
You've shared a great amount of, this is a great interview. Is there anything else that you wanted to say? I mean, I think you got across that it is really a privilege, and I think it's a privilege for me to be here, but also that you're being back in Kentucky now, that you're here helping to tell this story from your own standpoint. Is there something you'd like to talk about, either the future or, I mean, you've really articulated most of it, but is there anything that you'd want to share more with me today?
Well, I would like to say, although Clifton, George, Elsie, Arthur, Elsie, at the time that they became a national park, with a lot of Bransfords there, and if they could hear me, and if they could know what I'm trying to do, my daddy, I just would say to them, I'm doing the best I can in your behalf. I only get to tell the story because of what your accomplishments were. So I hope that my appointment there and the way I tell the story would please you. I wish I could say that to my daddy. My daddy never got to see me come to Mammoth Cave. He died a year before I got in there. So I'd say, fellas, all you Bransford guides, at one time there were 9 of you on the roster. I want you to know I'm doing the best I can for you. Hope to pick up the torch for a little while. Sure. There's an interview with a Union soldier and abolitionist. He was at Mammoth Cave in 1863, and his name was James Fowler Rushing, and he had heard about Matt losing those children, and he had an interview with Matt, and he says to Matt, it doesn't seem to bother you coloreds when you lose what we free whites call children, and you call chattels, they say. And Matt said, oh no, Captain, don't you believe that. He said, colored people have feelings just the same as white folks. He said, now I'm the man and I can take such things, but although it went pretty hard for the old white, and her name was Pardina. He says, when it come to losing that last child, we've seen so much of this thing that we turns up once and let her go and deal with it best we can. He said, now that we get older, we got a good cabin, and plenty of furniture. It seems that they work for Master Doyle now. They were probably leased out to the Doyle family. He says, Master Doyle, not such a bad boss. He said, we do good if we just had the children back. And sometimes when I see his name, I wonder how he could have possibly endured. I have children and grandchildren. I can't imagine losing one. So sometimes when I'm in the cave and I walk over there where his name is, and I try to place my feet where his foot might have been at the time, it's almost as though I can feel his agony and his happiness too. Can't imagine. (1906). When I go down to Cathedral Dome, I feel like I'm just dwarfed. It's magnificent. Named that avenue, named Bransford Avenue. That's never going to go away. As long as that cave is there, the Bransford Avenue should be down there as a tribute to Will.
Had you did much caving until you came back? I mean, you
Hadn't done any caving. I was busy with my wife and I raising children and doing all the stuff American kids do. But I felt a burning inside of me. I knew that there was more to that story than my daddy knew. but I didn't know how I was going to find out. But Joy Lyons, bless her heart. She made me think she was in love with the Bransfords, in love with our story, and we're good friends.
Well, she is. She is. She's a true shooter. She's a passionate historian and folklorist and park employee, former park employee.
And just recently, we have something sent to me that suggests that Matt Bransford was actually able to get one of those girls back after the Civil War. And I think that it was Will's mother. See, Will Bransford, the Bransford that escorted those things to the World's Fair, was born out of wedlock. He assumed his mother's maiden name. And Daddy always told me that his father was a Caucasian guy from Cave City, so they knew that. So I feel that it was, I believe it was Will's mother that was the girl that Matt was able to recover. The other boy and girl, old folks only told me that the boy was last heard about in Memphis, Tennessee. The record book suggested there was something wrong with him, that maybe he would never marry, and perhaps he wasn't just a typical boy. Daddy said those girls were pretty girls, so they were beautiful. And maybe the owner had forced himself on those girls, which was not such an unusual thing. So sometimes I go to Memphis, Tennessee, I look in the phone book, there's Bransford's down there. I can't help but wonder, it's a kin people.
You ever call those numbers?
Mm-hmm. I've called a gentleman and he seemed very uninterested in talking about it, and I've called folks and said, well, I just don't know, son, I just don't know. It's a very low census last name. There's not a lot of Bransfords in the United States. And we know for sure that Thomas Bransford came from England, John Bransford, his daddy. All these things in the record book that Pat Davis has in Texas. And they were actually heir to King Henry VIII of England. From Honey Hill, England.
So you spoke to her on the phone after she called your dad.
Yeah.
Is that book been digitized, or have you seen it? Or
I've got a copy of it downstairs.
Nice.
Interesting, big ledger. It says Mary Jane Eubanks, Thomas Bransford's sister, was his secretary. And the skill and the penmanship is just awesome. Perfectly spaced letters. Talks about what slaves were worth.
Wow.
It's amazing. It's hard for me to believe that all this is coincidental. He said, when I was a little boy, we used to come down here and take buckets of water. 3 Springs, I was up there last year, and water coming from the hillside. And Daddy he would say, I used to plow this field when I was a kid. He said, now my daddy was a real strict Christian Baptist. He said he thought if you drank any kind of liquor, it was a defilement of your soul. But my grandfather was a chef, and 3 of his brothers were guides. So he said, boy, now I'm going to be gone. So they would stay in what was the old slave quarters, the chefs would. He said sometime he'd be gone 2 weeks. So Daddy said, now, his father would say, now, son, when I get back, he said, I expect these 2 acres to be plowed out here. So there's a mule. There's Jenny. Jenny. And Daddy said, we're just 8 years old. So he said, now, when my daddy told me I had them 2 acres plowed, you best be working on it. And he said, sometime when I was up there, the work was so hard, sometime I'd fall and the mule would be dragging me to the field. So we would find Civil War artifacts. Now I know that historians say that there was no major battle, but he says, when I was a kid, we would find cannonballs, we would find pots and pans where maybe Union soldiers camped up there. He said, it only made my day harder, because he said it meant that I would have to stop the mule and stack these things over by the fence road and then come back over and start plowing again. Daddy told me that. There was also a cousin named Eddie. There's a ghost story about Eddie Bransford. Eddie Bransford was Dad's first cousin, my second cousin, and Eddie's name can be found on the guide roster. And Eddie was a womanizer. He had married to an older woman named, her name was, she was much older than Eddie, and it seemed like there was some jealousy about him being quite a handsome, well-looking Bransford. And so in the wintertime, when the cave tours weren't very busy, they would come to Elizabethtown, Kentucky, and they would, she was the cook in the hotel, and he was a doorman. There's a pretty renowned hotel downtown Elizabethtown, used to be a pretty major stop, and so her name was Rhoda Woodson. And Eddie had taken a bus to Louisville, Kentucky, that she suspected he had gone to see a woman, him being married. She's older, cautious about Eddie. So he came in one morning after being gone all night. She was in the kitchen cooking, and she stabbed him with a huge knife and killed him. She killed him. She was very good friends with powerful people in Elizabethtown. It's on record. It's been found. She never served a day, so they brought Eddie's remains back to Mammoth Cave and buried him in the Bransford Cemetery down Great Onyx Road. So the cabin that Rhoda and Eddie had was real nice. Daddy said it was nicer than the one they had. So his father, John Henry, decided they were going to move into this cabin, unoccupied. Daddy said some unusual and strange things happened in that house. He said the girls will sleep downstairs and the boys in the loft. He said at night you could hear footsteps come down the hallway. Daddy told me this twice, and my aunt told me this just last year. He said sometime a cold air would come over you, even in summer, it felt like it's going to freeze you to death. He said that cabin was haunted. Daddy said, I'm not an advocate of ghosts. I'm just telling you what I experienced as a kid. He said, but the thing that made them leave that cabin, he said, my father came home one spring and saw someone in the orchard picking fruit that wasn't ripe yet. So he asked my grandmother, Julianne Bransford, why are you out there picking fruit and you know the apples are not ready? She says, I've not been out there. My grandfather, being a Baptist Christian, didn't believe much in ghost stories, but they left that cabin. They moved out of there. Then another family says, no such thing. We're going to move into that cabin. He said that whoever this next family was that moved in that cabin, unusual, strange things happened in that cabin. They moved out. And then finally, the Civil War civilians, when it was in the transition period, demolished the cabin. Who was there? Some say maybe it was a ghost of Eddie Bransford. I don't know. But what I'm telling you is what my daddy told me twice before he passed away, and my 94-year-old aunt in Glasgow told me this same story just 2 years ago. Nobody could live there.
Was that up by the on Onyx Road too?
This was. Mm-hmm. Not too far from the Bransford Resort.
Is that Bransford Cemetery, is it overgrown or is it kept there?
Not kept too good, but not too bad. That's where my grandfather, that's where my people buried. A lot of the graves up there are just footstone and headstone from field, but stone. But Henry has a real good grave. Henry was just 44 when he died. So he was so pronounced working in the cave, so he would log all night and work in the cave all day. Had a heart attack and died at age 43 walking to the cave one morning. But they saw they had a real nice headstone. This huge headstone. He's buried next to his wife Alice, and it simply says, Guide Henry Bransford, 1849 to 1893. Nice headstone.
He died the same year as the World's Fair. 1893. Is that when he died?
He was Yes, he did. He died the same year. I guess Will would have been in Chicago, wouldn't he?
Mhm.
Will would have been his grandson. Hmm. Maybe two things. I'm going to tell you this. When I was a kid growing up in Glasgow, coming to Mammoth Cave National Park on Memorial Day weekend, and 4th of July was just standard. So we'd load up in my dad's 49 Chevy when we go to Mammoth Cave. Well, we would ride up that dirt road, which was dirt then, up Flint Ridge, and we'd go down Great Aunt's Gate, and we would sit there in Daddy's car. And I was a little kid, and I didn't understand why we were up here in a hot day in that lane, sitting in the car, and Daddy wouldn't say a word, but my mother would say, well, boys, just sit there and be quiet. Your daddy's come home for a minute. But see, what my daddy was doing, he was walking down memory lane. I didn't understand how important it was for him to go up there and just look and remember, run up and down the lane barefooted. I've been baptized and going to Mammoth Cave Baptist Church. And then we would go back over to the hotel we'd go to the picnic area and have a picnic. Then we'd go to the motel, and some of those people, those Caucasian folks who worked in the hotel kitchen, knew my daddy. But see, they were Mammoth Cave people, and really in 1957, the takeover hadn't been that long, you know. So we'd go to the door to get an ice cream cone, and I told Joy Lyons, this is in Joy's book, and she said, well, how you doing, David? A Caucasian lady. She said, well, he'd say, well, Miss Millie, we're doing fine. I brought my wife and my boys to Mammoth Cave for a picnic. We would like some ice cream cones and things like that. She said, well, David, how many do you need? He said, well, Miss Millie, I need 4 for the boys, and I need a Coke for my wife and me. She said, well, you know, you have to go to the back door. And, you know, and I remember the pain in my daddy's face, but, you know, he never said a word. So we'd go to the back door, and they would bring out refreshments, and we'd go back over to the picnic area. And Dad said, oh, my mama said, this is a national park, and we ought to be able to go inside we want to. And Daddy said, no, they said, that's just the way things are, you know. And then after we would finish up our picnic, we would go down to the historic entrance. It used to be a parking lot down there where you could park your car and picnic table, all different now. So we'd sit there in front of the cave entrance and send these guides come up, you know, National Park uniform. And I remember being a little kid, I was about half scared, you know, badge and everything. And Daddy would be telling us our story, and they never knew who we were. Now, maybe one guy'd come through named Shorty Coates. I mean, Dad'd say, how you do, Shorty? Because Shorty Coates was one of those people that was there when Daddy was growing up over there. But most of the other guides were new people my dad didn't know. So they never acknowledged our presence, but I remember thinking as a little kid, well, my kinfolk had to do with this cave too, but they never knew who we were. And my daddy said, I just want to make sure that you all know what I'm telling you, because I wouldn't want it to go away. He said, because they told me that the Bransfords who was here were called into the office, and they was told that you need to be looking around for another job because you're not going to be grandfathered. So my whole message is, I remember being a little kid, but I was offended that it seemed like what my kin didn't really seem to matter, and nobody seemed to be interested in who we were. But now there's a rebirth. Now I get to tell you who we are. I get to tell you that in their behalf. That's what I want to tell you.
That's great. See, you had that deep connection. I mean, where you are today started,
Yeah.
those seeds were planted way back then. Just being at the cave with your dad and your mom,
Yeah.
knowing how much it meant to him.
A lot. Clifton Bransford, Elsie, George. I have a cousin in Chicago. She's Elsie's daughter, and she's 88 years old. And she said she remembers when they had their last week in Mammoth Cave, been uprooted, realizing that they couldn't stay. And she came back to Mammoth Cave about 4 years ago for a gathering, and she hadn't been there since, because she remembers being a young teenager, how sad it felt. Being uprooted from your house and having to leave a familiar place, going to a place that wasn't familiar. And also, my father told me that growing up in Mammoth Cave, it wasn't such an unusual thing for the people who own Dennerburn's store to carry your credit the next spring, because maybe some of the bills you couldn't pay until you sold your tobacco crop or your cattle. And he says once they moved to Cave City, they found out that even though Cave City was real close to Mammoth Cave, the connection and the ties weren't the same. So my daddy and his father and sisters and brothers moved to Cave City. He says, but people there weren't as accommodating to his father as those folks at Mammoth Cave. So there was a pretty good coalition between black and whites, even though it was segregation days. Because Dad said by clockwork in November, he said the Ku Klux Klan would burn a cross on a hill not too far from Great Ox Road. He said the flicker of the flame, and they would burn the cross in the fall time when it leaves off trees to make sure you saw it. And he said it was never a word said. So there was some clear common things about segregation and racism at Mammoth Cave, but overall, even in the 20s, in the 30s, and turn of the century, people of color and whites did pretty good in looking after one another. Because Dad said his mother died in 1924, and he was just 9 years old. He said the undertaker came from Glasgow to get his mother's body, and he brought her back the next morning. And he said blacks and whites from that whole ridge came over to their cabin, got his daddy's crops in, and took care of his cattle and stuff. Wouldn't let John Henry do anything. They sat up all night with the remains. That's a true meaning of a wake, you know. And then the next morning, all the black and whites went to the cemetery with his father and laid his mother to rest, and then things resumed normal operation after that. So the blacks and whites all supported each other. They're pretty darn good for the day.
It's quite a community.
That's what I'll tell you that.
It's great.